Hello students, welcome. This is the Fine Arts A Unit 1 summary. Today we're going to be going over the elements and principles of art in quite some detail, as well as art history, criticism, and aesthetics. But first, let's unpack the standards, shall we? The Utah Visual Arts Standards, we've talked about them before. How many strands are there? Can you remember? There are 4 strands. Can you remember what they are? 1 is to create, 2 is to present, 3 is to respond, and 4 is to connect. Today we're going to be focusing on strand 3 in this first part, responding. I can understand, evaluate, and articulate how works of art convey meaning for the observer as well as for the creator. So, to understand means I get it, right? To understand is to comprehend or get it. The more we learn, the more we understand. Remember, there's always 3 sides, huh? The truth, your side, and the other person's side. Articulate, I can talk about it. So, to articulate is to actually say something. So, if you say it well, someone might praise you by saying that you're articulate. To evaluate means you can judge it. When you evaluate something, you're making a judgment, one that most likely results from some degree of analysis. So we don't want to be quick to judge. We want to delve deep and gather evidence before we make a judgment or an evaluation. So here's your pretest. Take your pointer, and I want you to evaluate yourself on strand 3. Do you get art? Can you talk about how works of art convey meaning for the observer as well as the creator? And do you feel qualified to judge art? Where do you stand on those? Do you get it? Are you an A, B, C, D, or an F when it comes to getting it? Can you talk about it? Can you articulate it? Where are you at? What's your letter grade? And do you feel qualified to judge it? And if you don't feel qualified to judge it, what are you missing? Let's do a little bit more unpacking. I know that was a lot about standards, but I like talking about standards. So we're going to go a little bit more beyond the strand, and we're going to talk about the different standards that are in that strand. Why? Why do we have to do this? Well, because you don't know what you don't know until you know it. So hopefully by knowing what you don't know, that will give you the power to learn what you don't know. So standard 1, read it out loud with me. I can hypothesize ways in which art influences perception and understanding of human experiences. Whew, that sounds like a lofty goal. I can analyze how one's understanding of the world is affected by experiencing visual imagery. Where are you at? Here's our scale over here. How you feeling? Standard 3. I can interpret an artwork or collection of works supported by relevant and sufficient evidence found in the work and in various contexts. 4. I can establish relevant criteria in order to evaluate a work of art or collection of works. So we are going to be getting really deep. What? You're out of order? Oh no. Well, I guess that means you're only going to have to get out of your chair and jump around.
I came to get down. I came to get down. So get out your seat and jump around. Jump around. Jump around. Jump around. Jump up and get down. Jump, 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 jump.
A little bit out of breath. Next, we're going to talk about the elements of art. We're just going to watch this quick little video. There's 7 of them. We come back and see if you can remember them all.
These are the elements of art. Line, shape, form, space, color, value, and texture. A person cannot create art without using at least 1 or 2 of these elements. Lines are a continuous mark made on some kind of surface. Lines can be straight or wavy, thin or bold. When put together, lines create shapes. Shapes can be geometric, like squares, circles, and triangles, or natural, like a tree or a seashell. They can be two-dimensional or flat, like a pencil mark on paper. Or they can be three-dimensional, like a sculpture. When something is three-dimensional, it has form. Objects with form take up space, or at least look like they take up space. Space is the distance or area between, around, above, or within things. It can be the area taken up by an object, or it can be the area around an object. Color can often help show us space. Color is the most expressive element of art. There are primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. There are also secondary colors, orange, green, and purple. Secondary colors come from mixing the primary colors. Colors always have a value. Value is the lightness or darkness of a color. When a dark value is next to a light value, it creates contrast. Different color values can create texture. Texture is how a surface feels. They can be rough or smooth, wet or dry, soft or hard. These are the elements of art: line, shape, form, space, color, value, and texture. They are in every piece of art ever made, but they are also in the world around you. Look around. Can you find them?
Beautiful. All right. So the elements of art are the building blocks that artists use to create artwork. So, whoa, I didn't know I had that fancy thing going on there. So we have line, color, and to talk about color, we are going to talk about Matisse. So all of these are Matisse's artworks, one of my favorite artists. Why? Well, because it's so colorful. So Matisse's Sorrow of the King, which is the name of this artwork, is an influential piece from near the end of his life. Many critics consider this to be the most innovative period of his life. He'd begun to experience severe arthritis and had a bout with cancer, which forced him to be confined in a wheelchair. Instead of having his artistic talent dry up in the face of these challenges, Matisse was determined that he would keep doing his life's work as an artist. He could no longer stand to paint, so instead, he created paintings with scissors by cutting pieces of colorful paper and gluing them onto larger pieces of paper with the help of his assistants. They were called gouache découpée. Sorrow of the King is a fine example of this style, with its use of stunning colors and shapes to create a scene. So in other words, it's kind of like a collage, huh? Matisse's final self-portrait. So this work refers to one of Rembrandt's canvases as well, David playing the harp before Soul, in which, the young biblical hero plays to distract the king from his melancholy, which is sadness, deep sorrow. Here, Matisse depicts the themes of old age, of looking back towards earlier life, and of music soothing all cares. Matisse has represented himself by this central black form, like a silhouette of himself sitting in his armchair, surrounded by the pleasures that have enriched his life. He has combined a number of recurring themes from his life. The yellow petals fluttering away have the gaiety of musical notation, while the green odalisque symbolizes the Orient. So let's watch a fun video about Matisse. Respond, and I think we talked about this. Students will understand, evaluate, and articulate how works of art convey meaning for the observer as well as the creator. Standard 3 from that is to interpret an artwork or collection of works supported by relevant and sufficient evidence found in the work and its various contexts. So this is all going to come to life for you in this video. I'm super excited.
Huh? Here you go, Maddie.
Hey! This is who I was looking for on my bookshelf. Henri Matisse, the master of color. Thanks, Dada.
And who have we here?
Monsieur Matisse! What a surprise!
Maddie,
Huh?
you still have paint on your face?
I forgot. I was so excited.
C'est très bon. Being excited and forgetting what others think is the only way to create art.
Dada crazy! Hey, Maddie, look at this!
A lot of people laughed at my painting, Woman with a Hat, at its first public showing. They didn't like it at all. They called me Fauve, which is French for wild beast.
Fauve! Well, that was like me. I turned Maddie and her painting into wild colors.
I love her hat. It's just a bunch of colors that go up, up, and up.
Well, gigantic, outrageous hats were all the fashion back then. And so, that's what I painted. A gigantic, outrageous hat.
And look, Maddie, her face is pink and green, and she has a yellow dab on the tip of her nose, just like you did.
Yeah, it matches the big purple dot under her chin and the green beside her face.
Dada, yeah. With all those colors around her, it makes her colorful face look normal.
Yeah, this whole painting is so colorful. It's energetic and...
It's impulsive, oui! Colors are what matter to me. How they generate feelings and moods. How they interact with one another.
Yes!
Dada, yeah.
And different combinations of colors and patterns and shapes can generate very different feelings.
Ooh, this rug has a calming feeling. Da-da-da-dee. Da-da-da-dee.
This painting kind of makes me feel relaxed. It makes my eyes glide all around it, like Dada on that rug.
Ooh, yeah.
I saw this room as one big decorative pattern.
Huh? Hey, Maddie, the painting got unflat.
I can see it's a room, but it's flat. Monsieur Matisse, how do you make that room look like a flat, smooth surface?
I painted everything with equal balance. One thing doesn't stand out more than another. I gave each thing its own space and shape on the paper. The tablecloth had that shape, with the pears and the eggplants, vase and statue on top of it. I saw the screen, mirror, window and door as simple rectangle shapes. And the view through the window and mirror are just shapes of color I saw. And of course, the walls and floor look like the same thing, just a big flat pattern surface.
A pattern of a room.
Well, I actually called it Still Life with Eggplants.
Huh? It's not very still because the eggplants look like they're sliding off the table.
Yeah, and in the mirror, they're back on the table, but in a different place.
It's fun to play around with the space, colors and shapes of things.
Yeah, and make a whole new picture with them.
Like that one. Dada, whoa! This one is made only with colors, cut out into shapes.
Monsieur Matisse, you've covered your walls with colorful shapes.
Yes, my excitement carries me away. I forget about everything else.
You were carried away, all right.
Oui, oui, indeed. Well, I cannot do everything I love as easily as I used to. And so, I've created a garden here in my studio where I can walk.
You've made a color garden from cutout shapes.
Yes. I call my new style of art paper cutouts. I draw with scissors and play with colors. I can make them big or very small. And then arrange and rearrange them until it pleases me. Ah, yes, perfect. There.
Cool. cutting into color.
Fun, fun, fun! This one looks like a party.
Yes, I call it Sorrows of the King.
Huh? Sorrows of the King? But that sounds sad.
Yeah, but it doesn't look sad. I see music and laughing and dancing. Yeah, I'm confused.
Well, the king is very old, but he plays music and he surrounds himself with the memories of laughter and dance, and they soothe all his ears.
Yeah, how can the old king be sad with all those colors around him?
I want to do paper cutouts too. Thank you so much, Monsieur Matisse. I'm all excited.
That's good. And remember to forget everything else.
Matisse was truly a delightful artist, and I hope that you're starting to understand what this strand of responding and perceiving what it means to you. So let's practice on Matisse's Red Room. Students understand, evaluate, and articulate how works of art convey meaning for the observer as well as the creator. So can you interpret this artwork? Can you find some evidence to support it? Well, what I like to do is kind of take my elements of art and my principles of design and cross-examine a piece of art. So looking at each of the elements, is there line? How does the artist use line? One of the things I noticed we talked about from a class was the use of contour lines around a lot of the objects, where there's just so much red, the same color of raspberry red, that without this contour line, you might not realize where the table starts and where it ends. Whereas here on this edge, where we have the contrast against the white, the artist didn't need to use a contour line. There's an implied line there. Perfect. And then we also have the use of lines in the wallpaper and the tablecloth design. Color is very obvious, right? Uses a lot of color. That was his favorite element, color. And he's using complementary colors as well, and we're going to talk about that. But you could easily go through each of these elements and principles and analyze how the artist uses them in an artwork. So let's go ahead and delve a little deeper into how Matisse uses color.
Small fishing town of Collioure on the Mediterranean coast in France. In fact, it's so far south, it's almost in Spain. And just look around. The first thing that really strikes you is the very brilliant quality of the light and the strong, powerful, very saturated colours. And these were things that Matisse was always searching for.
Matisse was staggered by the intensity of what he saw and felt here, and the radical way he chose to capture it on canvas would horrify the art establishment.
His way through painting yet. He still feels all these earlier...
To discover why, I'm meeting Matisse expert Alistair Wright.
So this is where he painted one of the great paintings of that summer. This is the Roofs of Collioure from 1905. It's around this time that he starts quoting an aphorism, which was that a kilogram of green is greener than half a kilogram of green. What Matisse took that to mean is that if you want your colors to seem intense, you have to use more of them. You can't break them up into small areas. You have to put on a big slab of red if you want it to really sound as red in the painting. He started to use colors in ways that have never been done before in the history of Western painting. And I think for him, it's a fragile moment. He's scared. He doesn't know where he's going.
Matisse's blocks of wild colour barely resembled the real world and broke every established rule. Over centuries, the craft of painting had been refined. There were conventions of light, shadow, perspective, and imperceptible brushwork. But to capture his feelings about Collioure, Matisse decided to ignore all that.
So can you believe that this is one of the settings for a great turning point in modern art?
No, it's a nondescript setting, but this is where it all began to change.
This used to be a cafe, did it?
It was a cafe, and Matisse rented a room above it. Now it's an estate agent's.
This was the window that he opened and...
Yeah, this is the room that he rented in Collioure for the summer. And it's from here that he painted the open window.
The first thing that strikes me is that you look out, it doesn't look anything like that painting. He transformed what he saw.
The colours become elements that he can arrange on the canvas without reference to what's out there in reality, and those colours can then sing together.
Van Gogh's generation had started to free colour from simply imitating what we see. But no one had gone anything like as far as Matisse.
So you've brought along this colour wheel, and it looks very pretty, but what is it? What does it tell us about Matisse?
Well, this is a colour wheel that Matisse himself knew. It's put together in the 1830s by a scientist called Girot, who'd investigated the way the human eye sees colour. Complementary colours simply meant two colours from opposite sides of the wheel. So green was the complement of red, orange was the complement of blue. What had happened with the preceding generation of painters, to Matisse, they'd become very interested in this. And the colour combination that they'd become particularly interested in was yellow and blue. What Matisse does is to move around the colour wheel. So instead of working primarily with yellow and blue highlights, he starts working with green and red. As they're put together on the canvas, they jar. He very quickly becomes the #1 bad boy of French painting. All of the critics know his work, they all know they don't like it, but they know they have to take him seriously. They have a sense that this is where painting is going in the future.
Next, the bad boy produced an extraordinary portrait of his wife, Amélie. Its primitive simplicity and impulsive strokes of jarring, ferocious colour were another attack on the traditional rules of painting. Matisse was rubbished for painting like a fauve, French for wild animal. His next creation wasn't only dazzling and primal, it was vast, nearly 10 feet across. Over the next 5 years, his paintings continued to push the boundaries of form and colour by portraying an emotional response to reality rather than merely replicating the external world.
Excellent. So let's move on to the next element of art, which is shape. And you can see here we have geometric shapes and we have freeform or organic shapes. And what type of shapes did Gauguin use most often? So here's your clue. What do you think? What type of shapes do you see Gauguin using? If you said organic, you're right. Okay, here is a contrast. Let's see. Pierre Mondrian. What type of shapes does he use in his artwork? Geometric, yes. Okay, our next element of art is form. And so when you have a shape that has value added to it, it can quickly become a three-dimensional form. So remember that a form is like shapes that have value almost, and they also go back in space. They have 3 dimensions to them. Instead of just having an X and a Y value, they have an X, a Y, and a Z value. You guys remember that from geometry or algebra even? Good. And forms also have geometric form and organic form. So the next element is texture. So what is texture versus visual feel? Read it with me. Read out loud. This is how you remember words when you read them out loud. The tactile quality of a surface, the way it actually feels to the touch, is texture, okay? And tactile has to do with the sense of touch. There's a huge tactile difference between smooth glass and rough sandpaper, okay? And so if we're looking at this artwork right here, where there's actually a piece of metal that has real 3-dimensional texture popping off of the surface, there is an actual tactile quality to this texture, right? But when we are looking over here where the artist is drawing the visual feel of it, if you run your finger across it, it's still going to be smooth, right? So visual feel is, sorry, I have no idea why it's doing that, the way a surface looks like it will feel. So a wallpaper's texture may be smooth to the touch, but it might look like it has a lot of texture to it. So it's implied, okay? So here we go next. Texture is the tactile feeling. So tactile is what? Touch. Good. Which of these words would most likely refer to texture? Grainy, absent, expensive, or odoriferous? Who knows what those words mean? Grainy. Can you think of something that's grainy? Absent means you're not here, right? Expensive means it costs a lot of money, and odoriferous means that it has a strong smell. Grainy, yes, and if I look at one of these, this is the one that looks the most grainy to me, the rough texture. There are a ton of words to describe texture and visual feel, so if you're a vocabulary buff and you want to learn some textures to help you to analyze and respond and describe art, here are some great words. Pause this video, take a screenshot. What elements of art does the artist use to create the visual feel of rock? So this one is, if you were there and you were touching it, would be the actual texture. But this artist is creating a very similar visual feel. And what elements are being used? Line, value for me is a big one. Look at the use of this pure black contrasted against pure white, and there are some midtones there to show where the light is hitting directly and where it's not being hit. So for me, it's a lot to do with line and shading, value, shape. You can draw visual textures like this. It's really fun to just, if you love to sketch some different textures, create some different textures. The next element of art I wanted to discuss is value. So value is that blending of color, here we go, from pure whites, which would actually be the page color, through all of these tints, midtones, shades to pure black. So a really nice three-dimensional piece is going to have pure whites, pure blacks, and a variety of midtones. And you can create that with different textures in your sketching as well. You can see the values changing. So that's fun practice. How does the use of value impact the three-dimensional quality of these rocks? So if we start off with this first rock, basically all we have are contour lines. We don't have any value, do we? So it doesn't look three-dimensional. In this next work of art, let's see, what's the darkest? You do see a little bit of these darker values in here, like here and here and here, but you don't see a lot of it. Most of the shading is down in these lighter values, right? So it doesn't have that full pop. And then when we get to this picture right here, do you see pure blacks? Do you see that pure black? Maybe not quite that pure black. Maybe here, maybe to this point I'm getting it. And I do have pure whites, but I have a really nice variety of midtones in this piece, and it's blended smoothly so it looks very three-dimensional. This last piece, yes, we've got pure black. You can see that pure black, and that's why I was telling you guys, if you have a pure black crayon at home or colored pencil that you can combine with a regular pencil and a white colored pencil or white crayon to really get the full spectrum of value in your painting. That is how artists get their work to pop. Elements of art, space. So space is the area within and around. We've got positive space, which is the focal point. So with this one, it's kind of tricky because do you know what the positive space is supposed to be? It could either be this chalice or it could be the faces that are looking at each other. So space can play with your eyes a little bit. Positive space is usually the focal point or main subject, and the negative space is the area around the main object or background. Is it possible to use every single element of art in one artwork? Absolutely. And this would be a really fun project to do. I just like to give you guys ideas. If for those of you who are artists and like to sit around at home and make stuff, this would be a really fun project for you to do. The principles of design. So switching gears a little bit here, we've got balance, which basically has three different main kinds: the symmetrical, the asymmetrical, and the radial. We've got movement and rhythm, pattern. These three often go together. We've got harmony, emphasis, variety, unity, contrast, and proportion.
The first one is contrast. Contrast has to do with opposites, like fluffy clouds versus a cactus that's prickly. Those are obvious opposites or contrasts. You could also do it by color. Opposites of red and green is their opposite sides on the color wheel. It could also be by environment. We have land versus water, water versus sky, up versus down. Those are different ways that we can talk about contrast. Then we have unity. And unity can be through maybe the use of all cool colors. We could unify things by shape, having all sorts of different circles within an image. Or linking all of the different shapes together so that they all touch themselves, and that becomes unified. You can also use color to unify something by making it monochromatic, or all of one color. It could also be unified through having everything in one environment. This is an undersea scene, so all of the elements within this picture are underwater, making it unified. Next, we have balance. Balance could be like on a seesaw, where you have equal amounts and equal sizes on each side, and that's called symmetry. You could also have asymmetry, meaning you have about the same kind of stuff on each side, creating balance. But balance can also be achieved with an all-over pattern, because the weight seems distributed evenly throughout the whole image. This is kind of like what happens with a face, too, where you have even amounts on each side, creating a kind of symmetry or balance within a face. So simply because the image is centered in the picture, it can create balance in it. So those are 4 different ways to achieve balance. Here we have emphasis. I highlighted it to remind you that highlighting is a way to emphasize text. You can also emphasize something by making it different, or highlighting it with a color. You can group things together to make one seem emphasized above all of the others. You can have everything pointing to it so that that emphasizes it visually. Having one different than all the other also makes a point of emphasis so that we notice one above all of the others. Emphasis means making one thing stand out more than all of the others. Variety is our next art principle, and variety means differences. So we can have different sizes of stars. We can have different sizes of people. We could have different kinds of color. And we could also have different kinds of pattern. These are all variety. Differences help make variety. Movement. We have actual movement of somebody moving within a picture. Put a little line after them to say that they're moving in a certain direction. You can have literal movement if this was water and there's a wave going across it. But you can also have suggested movement. All of these triangles pointing in one direction give us that sense of movement. Even if nothing is moving, we can have a sense of movement. If this was a street, there's no cars on it, but our eye moves down that road to the foreground, giving us a sense of movement. The movement can even be our eye. As we look in a scene, our eyes are moved from the front to the middle to the back. Foreground middle ground, and background movement. Our last one is pattern. And pattern can be predictable pattern or mechanical pattern, like in that, shapes of alternating squares and circles, or it can be a natural pattern of leaves, an unpredictable pattern. You could have an unpredictable pattern of stars in the sky. So pattern has many different kinds, and they are natural and unpredictable, or they can be mechanical versus predictable.
And drama. Contrast is awesome. Emphasis, an area or object within the artwork that draws attention and becomes the focal point. Movement. Something I wanted to just talk about real quick was lines and movement. Vertical lines, they communicate strength, stability, and authority. You see those columns in the capital. Horizontal lines communicate calm, peace, and passiveness. And diagonal lines communicate movement, action, and drama. So movement is an illusion of motion. I love this painted. Created by repetition and rhythm. When your eye follows a path, your eye will move around in artwork when objects are repeated. Movement adds excitement. Lots of diagonal lines here. Movement directs the viewer's eye around the artwork. Movement can be directed along lines, edges, shapes, and colors. Unity. The definition of unity occurs when all of the elements of a piece combine to make a balanced, harmonious, complete whole. The parts fit together well. Wholeness, oneness. Unity is the thing that joins the parts together. The sameness, the oneness. Is this an example of unity? Why or why not? Is this an example of unity? I would probably say that that was more an example of variety. So we're going to talk about variety. It's the principle that refers to a way of combining visual elements to achieve intricate and complex relationships. It is a technique used by artists who wish to increase the visual interest of their work. Artwork that makes use of many different hues, which means colors, values, lines, textures, and shapes. It reflects variety. Keeping the same size while changing the color can also show variety. In other words, use a variety or different kinds of elements in art. Does this artwork represent variety? If so, what elements of art are used? Same for this one. Pattern. Repeating visual elements such as line, color, shape, texture, or value that tends to unify the total effect of a work of art as well as create rhythm. So we've got repetition, which refers to one object or shape repeated. Pattern is a combination of elements or shapes that's repeated in a recurring and regular arrangement. And then rhythm is a combination of elements repeated but with variations. This is an example of using all three. Repetition. Pattern. Rhythm. Rhythm can be random, regular, alternating, flowing, or progressive. Random, regular, alternating, flowing, progressive, meaning that the basic structure is repeated, but it changes a little bit each time it's repeated. And how would you describe the rhythm of this? Random, regular, alternating, flowing, or progressive? Same question. Let's learn about Yōyai Kusama. Students will relate artistic skills, ideas, and work with personal meaning and external context. Standard 2 of this is to describe how knowledge of culture, traditions, and history may influence personal responses to art.
私の希望というのは将来芸術家になることだったの。それで10歳頃から私は絵を山のように描きました。母が絵を描いてはいけない。お前は財閥と人と結婚して将来家庭の主婦になると言って私の絵の具だとかカンバスなどを取り上げてしまいました。
Making art was something that she seems to have done in opposition to her family, but she also was innately talented, and you look at the early drawings and they are completely exquisite. The challenges to become an accomplished artist in a Japanese provincial milieu must have driven this notion that at some point she would have to escape. She was on a train to stardom. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. She had a suitcase full of drawings and she set about selling herself.
New York に着いた時に初めてエンパイアステートビルに乗って行ってそれから広いニューヨークを見て私は感動しました。そして私はいつかこのニューヨークを自分の心の中に芸術的な山のような私の蓄えられた力でもってこのニューヨークをいつか制覇して世界に飛び出ていくということを深く誓い合いました。
When she first came to New York, it was a man's world. The art world was aggressively male. It was a cutthroat period, you know. I think it was very difficult to be a woman artist.
そしてニューヨークでもって私は死に物狂いで戦いました。美術のことで。そして一生懸命絵を描き、細かい網目の作品を作って、そしてそれが33フィートの大きさになるの。朝から晩までその網を描いておりました。私がね絵を描いてるとねそしてその絵がね床を見るとその絵がね発展してって向こうを見るとね幻覚が来て全部ね幻覚になって渦まってそれでね結局私はねエンバイラメンタル超芸術家としてね発展することになってました。
She was taking away your ability to focus, breaking all boundaries of space.
詩の小説であります。で、私たちも結局花を見るとそれと同じ花がいくつもつながっていて、それに対して追いかけていくとパニック状態に陥って私自身その花を食べてしまう。それは結局体の調子が悪くてね。あまりにも絵描きすぎて、それで具合が悪くて、こっちの方に来まして。
To go back to Tokyo and to start from scratch again for Kusama was quite extraordinary. Because she wasn't known there and she hadn't been recognised. Clearly, the strains and stresses of life, the memories, have forced her to withdraw. But what she's always done, she has always managed that process incredibly well. Kusama is now living in a mental institution, but by day she occupies across the street in a busy suburban neighborhood of Tokyo a very well-appointed studio facility where she has a team of assistants and she has a space for painting, she has a space for her library, her archive, and every morning she gets there and she's the consummate professional and she works from 9 to 6. And I think there's a sort of a managing madness about Kusama, which is so utterly sane, which is really interesting. She's used her trauma, she's used these experiences in her past. She's been able to harness experiences that might drive other people insane to enormously productive ends. She's an extraordinary person in that way.
reflection. That's what it means to connect. So a lot of times understanding art means that you take the time to connect, do your research. So that is how you can relate skills, ideas, and work with personal meaning and the external context. There was a lot going on in that video. Describe how knowledge of culture, traditions, and history and her personal experiences influence her response to art, as well as you as the viewer of her work. Another principle that didn't really get talked about too much in that video was proportion, the relationship between two or more objects. I love proportion. Describes the size, location. So the fact that the house is so much smaller than the girl in the foreground says the house is very distant from the girl. Or the amount of one element to another. Look at the mass of that whale compared to that tiny ship. Objects that are smaller appear to be more distant. Proportion is a technique used to create depth. So you could pause the video if you want to look at this and describe the way the artist uses the principle of proportion in this piece to somebody who might be in the room with you. Balance the equal distribution of visual weight in a design. So we've got symmetrical, asymmetrical, radial. That's where it goes kind of in a spiral toward the focal point. And I learned a lot about the elements and principles of design at this website, flyschool.com. There is so much information on there. You would really enjoy it. So if you're an avid artist, check out flyschool.com. There's a ton to learn. So an historical approach. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about art history. If you did the Unit 1 readings, you know that it did touch on art history, which we're going to be doing a lot of in this class. It's considering the political, religious, and social events that unfolded during an artist's time, the contribution artists have made to culture and society, the development of art through time and place, art from various historical perspectives, learn what different cultures valued, appreciate the different ideas people have had, and you can often look at our own current modern day world through a historical lens from a different time period and think about what would those people think of the world that we've created today. Artists are grouped into periods, civilizations, and styles. So a period is a time frame when artworks with similar characteristics were made, for example, the Renaissance period. Civilization is a stage of social development of a particular people characterized by the building of cities and marked by advances in knowledge and skills in areas including technology, politics, and the arts. For example, the ancient Egyptians were a civilization. Styles, the way an artwork looks or the way an artwork is made. For example, Impressionism and abstract are different styles. Aesthetics has to do with beauty, right? The philosophical study of art that explores fundamental questions such as what is art and what is beauty? What things count as art? Can art serve other purposes, or must it be just art for art's sake? What makes something high art as opposed to popular art? What makes an aesthetic object valuable or beautiful? Who determines the meaning of an object, the audience or the artist? Can we judge the artworks from different periods or styles in the same way? Are separate theories needed to judge paintings, movies, songs, and novels? So aesthetics. Yeah, there are a ton of other questions that could be asked. And at the test, you're going to find another question that asks about that. And hopefully you'll get the right answer. What is art for? So once again, strand 3, respond. Understand, evaluate, and articulate how works of art convey meaning for the observer as well as for the creator. And then we're going to be looking at standard 4 here. Establish relevant criteria in order to evaluate a work of art or collection of works. So let's take a quick look at this video.
Art has a very high status in modern societies. People flock to museums, and artworks fetch record prices. But our age is also oddly reluctant to say in clear terms what art might actually be for. An odd mystique surrounds it, epitomized by the puzzlement many of us feel as we look at yet another odd-looking modern work of art in a contemporary museum. We're often left quietly and politely wondering, what is it all meant to be about? For most of history, this kind of question didn't arise because it was abundantly clear what art was for. The question mark over the purpose of art is really a modern one. So let's go back in time and find out about a wider range of options that we might be able to draw on fruitfully today. Rome 290 AD. Deep below the imperial Roman city, the faithful secretly gather in catacombs or burial chambers to celebrate a new religious figure, Jesus Christ. Christianity, though still in its infancy and ruthlessly persecuted by the Roman authorities, is rapidly gaining ground. Like so many religions before it and since, Christianity has become involved with the making of art. Here, an unnamed and not especially talented artist represents Jesus' healing of a bleeding woman, an incident recorded in the New Testament. Like all religions, Christianity is using art for a clear and understandable purpose, to make its message more resonant, emotionally attractive, and popularly appealing. Art is like a kind of advertising for its ideas. Soon, Christian artists are going to dominate Europe. For almost 1,000 years, almost all art produced in Europe will simply be Christian art. From humble beginnings in a subterranean prayer room, Christian art will go on to produce extraordinary cathedrals, paintings, sculptures, and celebrating and enhancing the prestige of its messages. Thailand, 15th century. An unknown craftsman finishes a statue of the Buddha, one of many hundreds of thousands of such statues produced over the centuries in Southeast Asia. The purpose of such art is extremely clear. You're meant to look at the Buddha and take inspiration, becoming a little more as he is. The sculpture is an invitation to calm and contemplation. In the East, as in the West, art's function is evident, to support the truths set down by religions, to make ideas more easily digestible. Paris, January 1801. The French artist Jacques-Louis David finishes Napoleon Crossing the Alps. It commemorates a moment when, a couple of years before, Napoleon, still in his 20s, launched a lightning raid on the North Italian states, winning a series of astonishing victories. In the picture, Napoleon masters a white warhorse, though he actually crossed the mountains on a more serviceable mule. Here, art is doing something it has done throughout history as well, acting as propaganda for a political cause. Napoleon is looking back to the example of Louis XIV of France, who did a lot of propagandizing with art. It was a habit he got into throughout his rule. Paris, 1833. The poet, novelist and critic Théophile Gautier publishes an essay about art, which argues that art must free itself from the poisonous agendas of religions and governments. The point of good art is always to be just for its own sake. As he put it in French, l'art pour l'art, art for art's sake. This doctrine of art for art's sake becomes the motto of the new generation of romantic artists, who set themselves against the old ideal that art should serve religion or powerful rulers or nations. Nonsense, says Gautier. True art must serve nothing at all. It is an end in itself and doesn't try to change or do or speak about anything. Artists set themselves apart from the bourgeois commercial society growing up all around, which is always trying to sell people things. Art should try to inhabit a loftier, more abstract realm. New York, 1917. The artist Marcel Duchamp prepares to exhibit his latest work at a show by the Society of Independent Artists. It is, surprisingly, a urinal, titled simply Fountain. Duchamp is in rebellion against many notions of what art is, that it should be easy to understand, that it should make sense, that it should promote something. The true artist, argues Duchamp, must defend himself against any confusion with advertising, mass media, government propaganda, or religious indoctrination. The true purpose of the artist is to stand outside the mainstream and create works that are enigmatic, mysteriously provocative, and rather silent. New York, 1949. a Russian émigré artist, Markus Rothkovich, who has renamed himself Mark Rothko to escape anti-Semitism, exhibits a new range of works at the Betty Parsons Gallery in Manhattan. They are a revelation, in that they seem not to be about anything. They are about pure colour fields and are as abstract as music. For some, they are the greatest works of the 20th century and soon fetch enormous prices. The Museum of Modern Art acquires a major set of Rothkos, as do other national museums around the world. Rothko becomes representative of the more obscure direction of 20th century art, highly appealing to an elite who will often pay enormous, incomprehensible prices for works, but puzzling for the wider public. Venice, June 2005. The world's most prestigious art fair, the Venice Biennale, opens at the newly restored spaces of the Arsenale. It has been curated for the first time by two women, Maria de Corral and Rosa Martinez. 41 artists are shown from all over the world. The nearby Marco Polo airport is filled with the private jets of the world's billionaires, many of whom profess to love art. Elaborate cocktail parties are held late into the night. Art has become a playground for the super-rich, as well as an obligatory tourist destination for weary travellers. Art is both hugely revered and yet somehow still in question. For most of its history, art has been saddled with a mission, to glorify religion or to speak well of the state. Modern art was the result of a swerve away from these agendas for extremely understandable reasons. Yet, if art is to regain its true centrality, it should overcome its hesitation about stating what it's really for and is trying to do. It is really and has always been a sophisticated tool, a tool that can help us to cope with things like loneliness, that can fill us with hope, that can help us to communicate our inner world, that questions power and aims to improve political systems. It is never an insult to ask art to do things for us, to be a practical part of our daily lives. We honour art most when we give it the highest task of all, to help us to lead better lives.
Excellent. So hopefully that served to just communicate or to confuse you even further about how to establish relevant criteria in order to evaluate a work of art, right? So, hey, everybody is going to interpret art differently, and just know that that's okay. So, criticism and aesthetics. So, big word criticism here. An organized approach to viewing, thinking about, and judging works of art based on the elements of design. So, you can call them the elements of art or the elements of design interchangeably. It's okay, nobody will be mad at you. And the principles of design. A work's historical context is something you definitely want to take into consideration when analyzing and criticizing art. And your own opinions. It's subjective, meaning that every person is going to perceive art differently based on their own background knowledge. So that brings us to the critique, something that we'll be doing. You'll be submitting your first work of art, and I'll put it together in a gallery, and we'll do our first critique, and we will do the 4-step critical thinking process where you describe the artwork. So that's basically the physical attributes that you see, the subject matter, the medium. Was it painted? Was it a collage? Was it a drawing? That type of thing. The historical information about the artwork, the name of the artist, the date it was created. Analysis determines how an artwork is organized using the elements and principles of design. So when I talk about the analysis, I'm usually asking, like, tell me how the artist used the elements and principles. Interpretation, discuss how an artwork makes you feel. So to interpret is basing it on your feelings, what you think the message was, or what was the main idea, or what was the mood. Evaluating is just like when you take a test and you decide whether or not you were successful at learning the material. So evaluation is forming a judgment about the success of an artwork. So if you see the word success, what is that referring to? Evaluation. All right. Well, it's time to take out your week 1 test. So go ahead into the week 1 folder, click on the week 1 test, get that started, and then you can answer the questions. Here we go. Question 1. What type of shapes did Gauguin used most often? Vertical, organic, horizontal, or geometric? I hope you know the answer. If not, you can always go back through the video and try to find the answers. Question 2. Which of the following is the best definition of texture? A tactile surface quality or feel of an object, the area taken up by objects or surrounding them, the lightness or darkness of a surface, a continuous mark made on a surface. I hope you get that right. We talked about that. Question 3. Which statement best describes how Henri Matisse creates variety in the Red Room? Variety. Is it he uses similar shapes and values? He uses different kinds of lines, colors, and patterns. He overlaps contrasting forms. He adds texture to the objects and the figure. Which one of those best describes variety? Question 4. Which of the following is the best definition of unity in an artwork? The quality of an artwork in which the elements are visually equal, an arrangement of elements that creates a visual rhythm, the feeling of oneness that occurs when all parts of a design fit together well, the use of different lines, shapes, colors, values, or forms to create interest. Which of those describes unity? Question 5. We group artworks with similar characteristics into periods, civilizations, or styles. Which is the best definition of civilization? Is civilization the years during which a particular culture created works of art, or the common characteristics among different groups of people around the world, or a stage of social development of a particular people that is characterized by city building? Which one of those represents civilization? Question 6. Which is a distinguishing characteristic of fauve paintings? They have representational colors and textures. They have bright colors and simplified forms. They have highly detailed forms and textures. Do you remember? Question 7. Which of the following is an aesthetic question you could ask about El Greco's The Burial of Count Orgaz? So we're asking an aesthetic question. Remember when we were talking about aesthetics, I listed all those types of questions. Which one of these would be an aesthetic question? Does the painting have to tell a story to be considered art? Where is pattern most prominent in the painting? How did El Greco use color and value in this painting? Which one of those questions is aesthetically based? Question 8. In which step of the critical analysis process would you express your personal opinion about whether or not an artwork is successful? Do you remember what I said success refers to? Interpretation, description, analysis, or evaluation? So after you've finished answering them, click submit. How did you do? If you didn't get a perfect score, check to see which questions you missed in the feedback. Scroll through the video and re-watch to find the answers, and then retake the quiz. You should be able to get a perfect score if you're really paying attention to this video. So thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great weekend.